Some years ago, a young man named Tim walked into my office. Is anyone here named Tim? Hi, Tims, and sorry, I'll be appropriating your name for the entirety of this talk. Tim did not fit the stereotype of a person with an eating disorder. For starters, he was male when most of my clients were female. He was large and muscular when most of my clients were thin and skinny. And he spent hours at the gym lifting weights when most of my clients spent their hours running on the treadmill. Later on, I learned that Tim was using drugs to try and alter his appearance, but he wasn't using laxatives and diuretics to try and lose weight. He was using anabolic steroids to try and build muscle. Everything Tim said and did was familiar to me, but with one crucial point of distinction. The intrusive and preoccupying thoughts that he had about his body, his punishing eating and exercise routines, and his drug use were aimed toward achieving muscularity and not thinness. Tim had muscle dysmorphia. It was professional bodybuilders who first noticed it, living in California in the 80s and training in the famous outdoor gyms of Muscle Beach. They called it bigorexia, a colourful nickname for a reverse form of anorexia nervosa. But muscle dysmorphia is not limited to professional bodybuilders, just like anorexia is not limited to runway models. And the disorder doesn't start with sufferers wanting to have larger-than-life muscles. The beginnings are a lot more humble than that. Common among sufferers are stories of being bullied at school for being too scrawny or too fat, of difficult and fraught relationships with friends, parents, and partners, of a tendency toward perfectionism, and of a lifelong and pervasive sense of not being good enough, or what we might call low self-esteem. And so an earnest desire to feel better through looking better results in a gym membership, a workout plan, and a diet. And they're certainly not alone in this. Over 4.5 million Australians have a gym membership. But at some point, for an increasing number of men and boys, this otherwise benign desire to be more attractive transforms into something categorically disordered. Individuals with muscle dysmorphia spend over 5.5 hours each and every day thinking about their muscles and body size. They turn down important social occasions so that they don't have to compromise their dieting or training. They endure frequent, long and painful bouts of social isolation as their relationships with friends, partners, and family break down. Shame, guilt, anxiety, and embarrassment over one's body become their predominant emotional landscape. So much so that in the only study to look at suicide and muscle dysmorphia, fully 50% reported at least one previous suicide attempt. For Tim, the pain caused by lifting weights with a sprained wrist was preferable to the anxiety caused by missing a workout session. Not knowing the precise macronutrient content of the food he would be served was enough to compel him to miss a mate's wedding. Now, some of you might be skeptical, and I get it. There is a concern that psychologists and academics like myself are needlessly pathologizing the otherwise extremely broad and normal spectrum of human behavior and experience. That we're taking boys and men's earnest desire to be more attractive versions of themselves and we're turning it into a disorder. That we should be celebrating these boys for hitting the gym and building muscle rather than castigating them. Well, let me reassure you that a diagnosis of muscle dysmorphia, just like all eating disorders, is not a trivial or lighthearted matter. Muscle dysmorphia entails significant and long-lasting functional impairment in the lives of those who have it. It cuts across their personal relationships, their job performance, their performance at school or university, and their physical and mental health. And complicating matters further, a lot of individuals with muscle dysmorphia don't have great insight into their condition. In the same way that someone with anorexia can look me in the eye and convincingly tell me that they're obese despite being clearly and dangerously thin, a person with muscle dysmorphia can look me in the eye, tell me they're scrawny despite being objectively very muscular. Muscle dysmorphia, like all eating disorders, is a very real mental disorder. And we know muscle dysmorphia is becoming more common because of what we're seeing with steroids. Anabolic steroids are now the #1 most commonly injected drug among new injection drug users in this country. That's ahead of heroin, methamphetamine, opioids, all other drugs. And it's not even news. It's been this way for the past 5 years. They're not athletes. Fewer than 1 in 10 men who use steroids in this country play any type of sport, and that's if I'm generous and include non-traditional sports like boxing and MMA. The modern-day demographic profile of new injection drug use in this country is boys and men who simply want to look better, and I'm willing to bet that's news to most people in this room. Tragically, we're limited in what we can do for individuals who use steroids, regardless of whether or not they have muscle dysmorphia, because the research simply hasn't been done on how to safely discontinue the numerous types and combinations of steroids that are out there. For example, I had a young man who was taking equipoise. This is a veterinary steroid we used to give to racehorses. He said to me, "Scott, what's going to happen if I stay on this long term?" I said, "I don't know, mate. Maybe you'll win the Melbourne Cup." Admittedly, the short-term side effects of steroids are sensationalized, but they work. Steroids work, and that's why we get long-term users, because once your self-esteem is wrapped up in the size of your muscles, why would you come off? And that's when you risk the long-term, irreversible cardiovascular and endocrine complications, infertility, and a lifetime of testosterone replacement therapy. So why? Why now? Why is muscle dysmorphia and anabolic steroids only on our radar now? Well, boys, just like girls, are influenced by the bodies they are exposed to. Behind me, you see action figurines of Luke Skywalker and Han Solo from the original release of the Star Wars trilogy. And on the right, you see the re-release. They've adopted that classic bodybuilder pose of big arms and broad shoulders and a muscular chest. And this is an analog to the Barbie dolls that are widely recognized and criticized, marketed to young girls. And it's not limited to action figures. Research shows this same pattern of increasing muscularity in fitness magazines, television, movies, video games, and increasingly in social media. There is no gene in boys' genetic code that immunizes them from the influence of these messages. The title of this talk is a bit of a misnomer. When I submitted it to TED, it was called Muscle Dysmorphia, the Male Eating Disorder. But muscle dysmorphia is not any more a male eating disorder than anorexia is a female eating disorder. Men can get anorexia and women can get muscle dysmorphia. The takeaway message of this talk is that as society places increasing value on those aspects of physical appearance that can be modified through diet or exercise, whether it's body fat or muscle or some new combination thereof, we create the environment in which eating disorders can flourish. Eating disorders are moving targets. They change in response to the types of bodies that our society values among its constituents. And muscle dysmorphia is just the latest manifestation of our cumulative overinvestment in our physical appearance. So what do we do about it? We fight back. Be mad and criticize standards that teach boys and girls that the most important sense or source of their self-worth is their physical appearance. Let's celebrate bodies for their function and not just their form. Let's dismantle the stigma that men and boys don't care about their appearance, because that is patently false. And while we're at it, let's get rid of the stigma that people with eating disorders are vain or narcissistic or somehow have only themselves to blame for their predicament. Criticize traditional notions of masculinity that discourage men from speaking openly about their appearance. And don't just do that. Offer young boys substantial and genuine alternatives to masculinity that they can work with and that resonate with them. And on an individual level, for those boys and men who do worry about their appearance, you have to seek help. And I know that's hard. I'll bring it back to Tim. You know, Tim sought help and now he's okay. He'll never be cured per se, and I don't like the word cured in mental health. He'll always be a bit more likely to think about his physical appearance, more prone to feeling poorly about himself when he sees images of muscular men and compares himself to them. But he is recovered. He knows the personal boundary that distinguishes the otherwise benign interest in physical appearance that we all have from the muscle dysmorphia that once consumed his every waking moment. And we can all find that personal boundary, and we should. If not for our own betterment, then for the betterment of future generations. Because whether we want to or not, they will absorb not only the values about physical appearance that we try and teach them, but the broader values of the society that they live in, which, through our inaction, we reinforce. But with persistent challenge and courage, we can change. It's been a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you.